On today's episode of The Dead Life, I'm talking to Lynn Golden. She's a death doula, conscious dying coach, and educator. We're going to talk about end of life and Lynn's experiences with it, as well as how others can choose this sacred path. You can follow me on Instagram at Medium Allison, on my Facebook fan page. You can binge on my videos on YouTube, and you can see me live in Scottsdale, Arizona at the McCormick on June 18th. Ticket information can be found at AllisonDubois.com. Lynn, thank you for stopping by to enlighten us.
I'm so happy to be here, Allison. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. I think my listeners are going to be really fascinated to find out that there's a profession called being a death doula. And is there a difference between a death doula and a hospice nurse or a hospice worker, somebody who sits with people while they're dying?
There is. And in fact, I've been both. So my experience as a hospice, I'm not a medical professional. I'll say that first. I began as a hospice volunteer. And I find that as amazing as that is, I often don't know anything about the person I'm sitting with. So I don't have a relationship with them. Mm-hmm. I might have 2 hours to spend with them maybe once a week. And then I may never hear from them again or hear anything about them.
Wow. And
when I heard about the work of a death doula, I felt like it was made for me. And I immediately jumped into it.
Okay. Is a death doula more maybe spiritually based in what their practice is than somebody who works in a hospice and is a volunteer? Are you given more latitude to stage the room and the music and to get sort of a customized detailing of what they want their end of life to look like?
Ideally, yes. That's, I think, one of the biggest differences. And just to back up to your last question, I think that hospices began working more as doulas do today. And over the years, it's become more medicalized. And so there is this need for a bridge. And I think that's what the doula provides. Mm-hmm. What we hope to do as doulas is meet people where they're at. Not everyone is going to want the same, the lavender and the diffuser and the same music or want the same prayers or rituals.
Sure.
So the longer we have to get to know them, the better.
Yeah, I would think that would be a beautiful thing. But does watching a person's end of life weigh on you personally?
It does, only when I'm not taking care of myself.
Mm-hmm. And how do you do that?
I'm very active. So, yoga and having my own spiritual practice and meditation is really important because it can weigh on you.
Right.
Especially when someone's passing may be a little more stressful for the family involved.
Sure. So is the family in the room with you or is it just you?
As a doula, it's usually the family as well.
Okay. And do you find the family to be more complicated than your patient? Or have you had to tell them to leave the room before because they're stressing out the person who's passing? Have you had any interesting stories around that?
I have. And let me just say, we're all complicated.
Right.
Aren't we?
A lot of emotions.
A lot of emotions. And we are messy. That being said, I've seen the dying process to bring out the most beautiful experiences between families and also times of a lot of stress.
Is it typically somebody who's a spiritual person themselves that wants a death doula in their so is their family more maybe enlightened than maybe a typical family would be walking down the street?
Sometimes it may be the family that's hiring you, mm-hmm. and the person that's dying is not as familiar with what you provide. And sometimes it's the other way around. So I've worked in both situations. And again, it's really a matter of understanding what's sacred to them and helping to complete that process.
So you're sort of a liaison for the person who's going to pass and their family as well. You fill mm-hmm. in the blanks when they don't know what to do, I would imagine.
Absolutely, especially if there's certain signs along the way that are familiar to you and may mm-hmm. become alarming to others. So
Yeah.
just being that person that's letting them know this is normal.
Right.
These are the steps that, you might see. And these are ways that we can provide comfort.
And you're mentally preparing the family as well, which I would think is very helpful for them in going through this transition.
Absolutely. And you mentioned us being more spiritual, and I think that that's a part of it. We also work in other ways. So practical matters. When I talk to people about their end of life wishes, it's important that they know what their options are.
Sure.
So we might provide some education there and help them complete, say they always wanted to know more about green burial per se. So we can help them to, explore their options in practical ways, help them to explore their options, as to where they want to be and how do we set that up? How do we make that as sacred as possible? Maybe there's some incompletion spiritually, and we might make sure that they have, people coming into the home that they want to speak to. And then
I had a mortician on once, and he's a millennial mortician, which made it more interesting. And I thought he was mentioning all the new cutting edge ways that you can be sent off, so to speak. And it's not quite legal yet. They're working on it. It's only legal in certain states, but fireworks, they can make you into fireworks. I'm like, I want to be fireworks. That would be perfect at your memorial to light up the sky.
There are so many options now. We were just talking, we had an alumni call for the Conscious Dying Institute. We were talking about human composting, aquamation. So these things are starting to become conversations. It's interesting that many people still think that embalming is mandatory. And that's surprising to hear.
So if you're not embalmed, you just have to be buried more quickly?
Yes, generally it would happen quicker.
Right. Okay.
But you could still have, visitation, and people are working more towards more home funerals again.
Really? Oh, that's kind of nice. They're going back old school.
Yeah.
Sort of the wake of the Irish. I like that.
Yeah. I think a lot of this, we'll call it the death positive movement. What's important to me is that we're remembering that we know how to care for one another.
Yes.
I think is something innate in us.
You're going to take some of the fear out of dying for people, because most people on the planet have a fear of dying, except I've been to countries like Japan where they're particularly spiritual, and the more spiritual you are, the less afraid of dying you are, it seems, for the countries that I've visited. The people that are afraid of dying tend to be people that think they're going to end and that there won't be any more once they pass. And which leads into, when people are dying, do they tend to be sort of fearful or calm? Do you notice their state of mind around that time?
I absolutely do. I've seen both. If you've been present through, say, someone laboring through birth, sometimes someone can give birth easily, sometimes there's labor involved, and it's very similar in the dying process. Sometimes people have more existential fear at the end of life. And then I've also had people at the very end look at me and say, so what happens next? They're on this great adventure. Yeah. And with the readings I do, I often bring people through who will say, I was ready to go. I didn't even know I was still here. And I'm good. Don't worry about me. And they get to be young again, which makes them very happy, especially the ladies, because we're more vain than the men are. The men care about their hair once they die. They're like, I got it back. I got my hair. Yes. Good for you. My first experience with a dying person, like many of us, we get into this work because of a profound experience in our families.
Sure.
So I cared for a great aunt. She was a lovely little Italian woman who was very generous with me through the whole dying process. She really brought me along with her, and I'm so grateful for that. And she was one that was really ready to go. And I remember one time her saying to me, oh, I'm so happy I don't have to cook for Frank anymore, which is her very picky husband.
Yeah, he probably will follow her quickly because he'll want her to cook for him again.
Actually, no, it took him about 7 more years, but that's a much longer story.
Wow.
But she she shared with me everything that she was seeing, everything she was feeling. She enlightened me to the events of ancestors returning, and I had never experienced that before. It was beautiful. She was naming the people in the room.
That was my next question. Have you noticed the dying talking to people in the room before they die, people you can't
Yes.
see? So you have experienced that.
Very often. Sometimes they're having conversations that you can't hear, and you can see them gesturing and looking up, and usually upward
Yeah.
to the corner of the room. But for Mary, it was at the foot of the bed. So she was naming, my grandfather and, her siblings. And then she said to me, well, Lynn, who was that toddler? There was a little girl at the foot of her bed, and she didn't know who that was. And she asked if it was my daughter, who was not there at the time, and not a toddler, but she was just trying to place this little girl. And I didn't find out until after she had died that she had a young sister who had died before she was born.
Wow.
Who her name was also Mary. And I have to say that it's through these experiences that I learn about what matters in life.
Right.
And that's, death has been very profound for me. So I'm really grateful that she took me through that journey with her.
I think dealing with death also can make you, we age. Nobody's figured out how to stop time yet. So everybody out there, if they're lucky enough to live, they're going to be our age at some point.
Yes.
And I find that being the age that I'm at, I've brought so many people through over the last 20 years that I can say, oh, I survived my 20s. I survived my 30s. I survived my 40s, and I got to raise my daughters, and they'll remember me, because you worry about that as a mother when they're little. What if something happens to me and somebody else has to raise them? So we worry. So it's sort of nice to get to a place where you say, how lucky am I that I got to get to this place that young people who pass, or younger people, never get to experience that first wrinkle or that first gray hair that we just don't like. We want to stay. It's like, can we stay young on the outside and just be wise on the inside? That'd be great.
Right.
But it doesn't work that way. It's a reminder to appreciate our days, I think, as we age, that it gives us a time clock that we can't ignore because we're looking in the mirror.
I think you're right.
So, what, if any, patterns do you notice around the moment of death? I know that they talk to people in the room. I've also heard that sometimes they'll sit up before they pass, or they reach out to somebody before they pass. Have you noticed any patterns with the dying around that time?
I think there are some patterns that you'll see repeated, but there aren't it's not a hard rule. Like we always say, that death is not prescriptive. And so as doulas, we're prepared for really anything, because it's always going to be a little bit different. But often there is some reaching near to the end. Normally it's just a real energy of calm that sets into the room.
Yeah.
And the environment really shifts energetically. It just feels different.
Do you play music from when they were young, around the time that they're dying, or when they're dying?
I do, especially if it's a situation where someone is dying alone and I've never met them before.
Yeah.
And so I make a lot of guesses depending on their age and maybe some things I see around the room. So I'll, call up a station on my phone that might be from kind of an era that was really lively for them. Yeah. And then I also make playlists with people and discuss that, if we have time to plan for the end. I had a client this summer. She died in July, but she loved Christmas. So we had decorated with her favorite Christmas decorations, and I had her favorite Christmas music as part of her playlist.
Christmas in July.
Yeah,
nice.
Why not?
I think the music is actually very healing, and I find it helps people to let go, because their mind goes back to another time and they start remembering all the people they lost from that time. And I think it makes them a little bit more at ease with being with those people again, or crossing. And the music, it is so triggering, just like smells of food or perfume or cigars. You know, they sometimes, the people who die will make us smell these things so we know that they're around. And
Yes.
I find that the music is very helpful. What kinds of requests do your patients make of you? Have you had any unusual requests where you had to think about it or you had to figure out how to make that happen?
No, normally it's things like, making sure people are present, that they want to be there. Sometimes they want to taste a favorite food, even if they're not able to eat anymore, which is common that they're not
Yeah.
able to. And so you just put a little taste on the tip of their tongue. So it's usually things that are comforting.
Yeah.
And, like I mentioned, the woman this summer who loved Christmas, so we decorated. So, and creating altars is also a really comforting thing to do with people before they die. So helping them decide, what's sacred to you and what do you want at your bedside.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
So you haven't had any really crazy requests yet. People are pretty sticking to the book on I know with funerals, they're getting a little creative where race car drivers, they'll race their casket around the track and have the party down there. And funerals are getting a little bit more custom tailored to people, which I really like to see.
Yes.
And it's nice to hear that in death, it's the dying process that you can have that too. And I think my listeners are going to be so excited to hear this exists and it can help to assuage the fear at the end of life because everybody knows someone that's headed there. It's like a roller coaster, tick, tick, tick.
Yes, it's likely. As I call it, the truthiest truth.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, do you have any experiences with the dying that stood out to you as particularly special? I know you mentioned the Italian woman in that experience. Have you bonded with your patients to a point where you felt like you know them, you really got the essence of their energy, where you cried when they passed, or it stayed with you, or you felt them there after they died, like maybe in your home, where they're letting you know they're okay?
I do feel, absolutely, I feel grief when anyone that even if I've just met them and I'm there through that process, that tears are very common. And I'm okay with that. I don't try to, hide my own emotions. I'm not going to fall apart so that people need to comfort me, but, I do feel some sorrow, especially if people in the room are feeling heartbroken.
Sure.
I'm empathic. I absolutely feel that as well. I think some of the most profound things for me have been creating rituals with families.
Mm-hmm.
We had a client who was a younger man in his 40s dying of a brain tumor. And he was dying at home. And I spent the last days with him and his wife sitting in their room and reading his favorite stories and lighting candles and playing music. And he had 2 young children. They were 5 and 8. And they were right there with him, in the bed and talking to him and helping to, make him comfortable. And they were there when he died. And afterward, I had them both anoint his body as I read some beautiful words to say goodbye. And those are the things that are most profound to me, because I feel like his death was his legacy in a way.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So his children will forever think of death in a more positive way because it was beautiful and they got to say goodbye.
And they'll probably be more at peace with their dad's passing because nothing was hidden from them. They were allowed to be a part of it. And that's very important. I think children, I always say they're the ones that suffer silently because nobody realizes how much they're hurting, or they don't know what to say to them, or the parents are mourning themselves and don't know how to be there for the children. They send them to a psychologist. So when you are dealing with them in that moment, I think that adds peace in their heart, knowing where their dad is and that dad's still with us and dad knows we love him, to where they can move forward without torturing themselves throughout their life, wondering if he knew they loved him, that sort of thing. So that's beautiful. I find that small children like the ones you dealt with, can be really accepting of it. And the way I see it, it's because they were on the other side more recently than the rest of us. Teenagers, when somebody's passing, in my experience, they run from it. Like they can't watch the suffering, or they can't deal with it, because as teenagers, sometimes we get a little selfish and we just want to keep going like things are okay, but they seem repelled in a way by it. The ones that I've seen, to where it's too hard for them to be there for long periods of time. And I'm thinking of a couple of teenagers where I know a man who's dying of cancer right now, and it's been a really drawn out event, over years. And they're just at the point where they just can't be around the pain and the suffering. What do you do in situations like that? Have you dealt with teenagers as well? Do they seem to understand this process with you more so?
Well, I think with anyone, including teenagers, we do have to meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to give them space. I have, well, they're young adults now, but they were recently teenagers. And so I think that learning where they're at and giving them space is the most important thing. I've worked with teenagers I'm also a life cycle celebrant, so I do funeral ceremonies. And I find that giving them ways to be involved is really important. And so that they can not feel like there's nothing they can do. And I think for most of us, we want to be able to do something. And I think that's a big part of what doulas can do, is bring people in.
Yeah.
Even if it's just showing them, well, a cool cloth on her forehead would feel really good right now. Do you want to go ahead and do that? And so just little things.
I think people who are highly sensitive and pick up on illness, it's harder for them to be in the room in those moments. It almost hurts them, or they feel the electricity of the cancer or the pang of the pain. And so I think some people, it just boils down to they're picking up on the illness themselves, and they can't process it. It's hard for people like me who've been doing it quite a while to be able to process certain types of death, because I've brought through passings of children thousands of times and seen all the ways that they can die as well. And have you had to deal with children who are passing?
I have not. That's something that I've been working. Actually, let me back up. So the Conscious Dying Institute has been incorporating pediatric death into our trainings, because it's not something that is talked about a lot.
Right.
And so we're offering short courses on pediatric death. And
that's great.
What I've experienced just through that training has been really beautiful. I haven't had any clients of my own that have been children. But I mean, I knew a little girl who had brain tumors, and she was really small, and we did a mass prayer for her. And I know this sounds weird, but I was friends with these morning show hosts on Kiss FM. So John Jay and Rich in Arizona. And so we did a mass prayer, and it was around Christmas. She was one of our Christmas wishes, that they had a wish for her. And I went to the hospital and had my Disney printed cartoon like mask and gown on, and our daughters went, and they went in and visited her too. And it's amazing how much life that can be in a body that is ill. And somehow her tumors got pushed into remission. So I think the prayers might have helped a little bit. And because she wasn't expected to survive the next couple of weeks. And so I just find children to be the positive ones, and they don't want the parents to worry. I'm going to be okay, Mom. Don't worry. I'll still be with you. I'm not going to leave you. They're just better than we are. They just are. So how can people become a death doula? And what made you exactly want to be a death doula? What kind of person does it take to be a death doula? Tell us, Lynn. Well, it's not something that you grow up thinking that you're going to do. Like I mentioned, I took care of Mary, and so I inherited her husband, Frank, and I cared for him for 7 years until he died. And he taught me so much about what dying with dignity meant. And I didn't know I had the capacity for that. And so from there, I became a hospice volunteer. And once I found out what a death doula was, it just all fell into place. And I really think that that was the reason why Frank was in my life.
Yeah.
7 years of caretaking for someone who I didn't grow up with him. He was a distant relative, and I moved to Florida. He had no children. And so I was the only person he had. And it was curious to me at the time as to why he and I be put together. And I really do think that that was why, because once I found the work as a death doula, it made a lot of sense to me that that's what I was meant to be doing. And also my interest in creating ceremonies, and I had been creating funerals. I made his funeral and some other people in my family, and it just all clicked into place.
So he was put in your life for your spiritual evolution.
I really think so. Absolutely. And then I found the Conscious Dying Institute. So I'll mention that there are a number of places to become educated as a death doula. I chose the Conscious Dying Institute because being someone who's a seeker, I felt like their training went a little deeper than others I had seen.
That's good information. And so is that an online course people can take, or is that just in Arizona? Like, where is that?
It's online. So we have students from all over the world.
It's wonderful.
I became a Conscious Dying educator for them about 1.5 years ago. So I helped teach the courses. We are offering 5 times this year a Conscious Dying coach and we call it a Sacred Passage Doula program. So there's 2 certifications there, and it's a 6-month study. And it's a deep dive. It's a really deep dive. We begin with ourselves, as any of this sacred work is. We begin with ourselves and peeling back our own layers before we're able to do that with others. And so it is a beautiful, beautiful course.
Do you take them for, I don't mean to be rude or anything, but like a final exam, do you take them with you for one of the passings so that they have you there and can see what it's like to go through that, so they're not get certified and then get in there and then panic or aren't sure what to do?
Because we're all over the world, we're not able to do that. We do offer them, a lot of reading in films and things like that, where they can understand more of the process. And then we encourage them to volunteer, to mentor, to find a mentor to work with. Okay.
That makes sense. Do you have a hotline they can call you? They just need a little reminder for chapter 25 or something on what to do.
That's right. We know they're encouraged to stay in touch.
Great.
Yeah.
That's great. I love that. Okay, let's see. If people want to find more information about you, where can they find you on social media? And the information about the school we're going to put up at AllisonDubois.com, as well as your links for anybody who wants to learn more about becoming a death doula. Did you have a social media platform or email that you would like to share with people?
Sure. My Instagram is dearly_beloved_life. My email is lynnGoldenlife@gmail.com. And my website is dearlybelovedlife.com.
Nice.
And information for the Conscious Dying Institute can be found at info@consciousdyinginstitute.com.
Lynn Golden, thank you so much for sharing your journey with my listeners. And I really appreciate you getting back to me so quickly when I reached out wanting to have a death doula on, and especially somebody who doesn't just do it, but you teach it. You're part of the educational process of this work. And I really appreciate you taking the time out to educate my listeners today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to see the ripple effects of this work.
If you ever want to come back on to promote the school or anything of that nature, a book, whatever, just give me a call.
I'd love to. There's so much more to say. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So I'm sending a big spiritual hug to my listeners. Thanks for listening. Until next week on The Dead Life, I'm Allison Dubois. And to all of my believers out there, don't stop believing.